So, Tommy, can you believe it? This is our 4th episode of our podcast, and today it's all about the 4 and the Runner.
Yeah, it is. We're talking about Toyota 4Runner today.
Yep, and we're going to be going into the history of the 4Runner. We're going to be talking about which ones are best and which ones are best avoided. But before we do that, let me tell you a story. A couple of years ago, I got to go on a program where I got to drive the 4Runner, the Toyota Trd Pro version of the Tundra, 4Runner, and Tacoma from Moab, Utah, all the way to Telluride, Colorado. And guess which one was my favorite?
Probably the 4Runner.
Yeah. The 4Runner is my favorite. And you know why?
Oh, why?
Well, because the Tundra Trd Pro does not have a locking rear diff. And on the trail, it's a little bit big and a little bit cumbersome.
Okay.
All right. And why didn't you think I liked the Tacoma Trd Pro?
I don't know. It's a good truck.
It is a good truck. But even though it's got the newer 3.5 liter and the more geared transmission, I still like the 4Runner better because of the seating position.
Okay.
You know, it just is one of those vehicles that I think is the perfect right size for me. You know, it's kind of a do everything. It's old school tech with kind of new school design with just the right size with Toyota's reliability. I mean, it'd be a hard vehicle to not recommend for somebody who's looking for the all-around off-road / on-road family truckster.
Yeah, I think it's a great compromise in terms of price as well because, you know, we've got a Wrangler outside that's $64,000 and apples to apples, typically a 4Runner will be cheaper than a Wrangler.
Sit back and relax or keep driving if you're driving. TFL Talking Cars is on the air, the world's most popular car podcast. Okay, maybe not yet, but we're working on it. Why don't you talk about the Trd Pro so people know what makes it different from like an off-road?
Well, just like any other vehicle, there's different trim levels of 4Runner. And it starts at the SR5 and it works its way up to the Trd Pro. The higher up you go in trim, the more off-road worthy it becomes. So the Trd Pro is the craziest of all the 4Runners. It's got the best suspension. It's got the rear differential lock, a special roof rack. Typically they come in special colors, different underbody protection with big skid plates. So that's kind of the meatiest, most aggressive model you can buy.
And the best shocks.
Yeah.
I mean, the coolest thing about it by far is that big stainless steel plate that you can't really see unless you're underneath it that says Trd Pro on it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in fact, they were so popular that remember when they first came out, the Toyota dealership here in Boulder was doing, well, I'm going to be nice and say homage, but realistically they were not real Trd Pros, but dealer built up Trd Pros because you look at it and you'd be like, I think that's a Trd Pro, and then you'd be like, but it doesn't say Trd Pro on the skid plate underneath.
Yeah, Toyota fans really treasure and actually sometimes collect the Trd Pros because they change from year to year to year, and they only build so many in every year. So it's almost like a prized commodity, a prized possession to these Toyota fanboys.
Well, the way they change probably most noticeably is in the body color, right? The year it first came out, there were only 2 colors, Voodoo Blue, which is this really eye-popping blue, and the other one was, I think it was black. Wasn't it black or white? I think it was white. No, it was white. It was Voodoo Blue and white was the other color.
Yeah.
So this like Arctic White and Voodoo Blue. And actually we built up a Land Cruiser and did it in that same white as kind of our homage, I'm going to use that word this time, to the Trd Pro because Toyota doesn't make a Trd Pro Land Cruiser. If you want to see that series, go to TFL. Is it on car or truck? Do you remember?
I think it's truck.
Yeah, I think it's on TFL Truck.
It's TFL Truck.
Yeah, and check out that Land Cruiser, the Trd Pro that we built up and basically created as Toyota would. All right, so you want to talk about the history of the 4Runner?
Yeah, so the 4Runner actually came out back in the mid-1980s as a somewhat SUV version of the Toyota pickup truck, which abroad was called the Hilux. And I say somewhat SUV version because basically they took a pickup truck and added a topper to the back of it, threw some seats in it, a bit of a roll cage, and called it a day. So it was really a converted standard cab truck that was somewhat cobbled together into, an SUV. But it worked really well, and it was really cool, and it sold really well. Now, the first generations had a fully removable rear end, so the whole rear cab portion would come off like an old Bronco or Blazer, and that made it very unique in the SUV market, being a convertible SUV.
Are you talking about the N60, right?
Yeah, that would be the first generation. 1984 was the first model year for that. Very slow, though. First years, they were only available with the little 4 cylinders, and then finally, a little bit into production, they released the V6s to be more competitive competitive with the American, competition. But very iconic SUVs, and actually the first generation 4Runners are becoming very hard to find because for a long time they were just cut up, modded, they rusted away. People used them as off-road bashers. And now there's so few of them that the ones that are on the road in good shape are being highly prized.
Yeah, and then something important happened to the 4Runner in '86, which is it went from solid front axle to an independent front suspension, which is unique to the 4Runner as opposed to, let's say, a Wrangler, which still has a solid front axle.
Yeah.
And ever since then, fanboys have been arguing about which is better. Is it IFS or is it solid axles? And that argument continues to this day. The one thing I can tell you is they both have their advantages and disadvantages. I think the solid axles are a little better off-road, in my opinion, and the independent front suspension is a little better on-road. Also, independent front suspension is a little more difficult to lift. It takes more money and it takes more stuff, right, to lift it. You can't just do a straight-up puck lift.
And all the old 4Runners, dating through 95 in the second generation are very, very modifiable, very easy to modify, very affordable to modify because there were very few electronics in them. Basically, they were Hiluxes underneath, right? They were old-school pickup trucks. Zach, are we doing good on sound? Are we still recording? Cool. All right, now let's talk about the third generation because the first and the second generation are quite hard to find. They were pretty agricultural in a lot of ways, but the third gen is really when the 4Runner came into its own. And then actually, when I was just a little guy, you owned a third generation 4Runner.
Yeah, the N180 ran from 1995 to 2002.
Right.
And I was deeply in lust with that. And I had this kind of weird kind of champagne color, which is the color that
they're all
that color now here in Colorado. It was a manual, which was cool. That was still when manuals were king. It had these kind of like brown checkered seats, which were very industrial and very long-lived. And it was about as basic as you could get. I don't think you can even find a vehicle now that still has those sliders for the temperature controls, where you go from like cold to hot by sliding it from left to right.
I was just in a car that had that.
Yeah?
I think it was like the Honda Fit or the Corolla still had a little slider for the fresh air. But they were, by modern standards, pretty uncomfortable, pretty rudimentary. But compared to the first and second gen, the third gen really brought in a lot of the luxuries, especially the late models. So by 2002, you'd find them in limited trims. One of my best friends had a limited trim, my roommate actually, and they had all this body-colored cladding on the side, full leather interiors, but they still retained a lot of the capability that makes them so special.
Yeah, we had the SR5 trim, which was the most kind of down the middle. The one thing I remember about it was that your mom hated it after she did like a 180 in the mountains with it, because the problem with it was it had a traditional transfer case, which I loved.
Right.
It wasn't all-wheel drive, it was four-wheel drive, so it had a low range, and then in order for like a truck, for you to put it into four-wheel drive, you actually had to take this lever and put it into the right setting. She just wasn't in that mindset to have to switch levers. So we went from that to a Volvo V cross country, actually, at that point.
Gotcha.
Yeah. But I missed that truck because it was a truck. Nowadays, the one thing I remember about that generation is you can see them. They're everywhere because they sold a lot of them, and they all have rusty fenders. Chrome fenders, and water gets into those fenders.
Bumpers.
Yeah, and the bumper rusts out in the corners.
Yeah, like the rear bumpers, exactly. One of my good friends, actually, also Matt, a while back we did a little series called Difflock, which was affordable off-roading. And my friend and Alex, we had these lifted Wranglers. They were YJs, but they had big tires on them and high lifts, and they looked really cool. And Matt had a bone stock third-gen 4Runner with a factory rear locker, so the first 4Runner available with the E-locker in the rear. And the 4Runner would just trounce our lifted Wranglers anywhere it went. The thing was just unstoppable. The third gens are actually starting to increase in value. Once again, a lot of them have been modded out. But if you can find a good one, especially with low mileage, you're going to be looking at...
Yeah, that doesn't exist.
Yeah, sometimes 10 grand. Yeah, there's no such thing as a low mileage third gen 4Runner. I mean, they're all at least 250K.
I mean, and what happened with those was, they got used up as family vehicles, and then they eventually got down to kind of the level where people would take them off-road, and then they would mod them. So, they're kind of at that... They kind of hit the bottom of the depreciation curve, but now they're starting to come back up because good ones that haven't been modded, and when I say modded, I'm not thinking about like our friends at Toy Tech, right, which actually go and do professional mods, right? These are like kids.
Well, like my friend and I welded together a bumper for it, which was pretty crummy.
Who have limited welding experience and just decide that the thing needs an off-road bumper, so they'd pull the rusty one off and put another one on. And those don't have a lot of value. The ones that do have a lot of value, of course, are always going to be the original stock with low miles, and those are really hard to find. But they're still an affordable way to get into off-roading.
Yep. I think they were... you can comment below, but I'm pretty sure they were 3.4-liter V6s, if I recall. Fairly powerful, not going to blow your doors off. It's not until we got into the 4th gen that we really saw some true power numbers in the 4Runner, because the 4th gen was the first and only 4Runner available from the factory with a V8.
Now that's the N210. That ran from 2002 to 2009, so now we're getting into kind of the timeline where things are getting a little bit more modern. So it's not as much of a truck. It's becoming more of a SUV slash crossover. This generation, saw the 4-liter V6, which it still has to this day. Which is actually a really good engine, a thirsty engine, but nevertheless a really good engine, smooth running, very reliable. Just a really good Toyota engine.
So we have got a really good friend named Charlie who runs Charlie's Garage in Boulder. He's kind of the premier Toyota repair shop in our county, and he's amazing. He does really high quality work. And we were asking him, because he's worked on every Toyota since 50 something. And we were like, what do you think the best engine is that Toyota's ever made?
Engine,
yeah, best Toyota engine. And he said hands down the 4.7 liter V8, which is what the 4th generation 4Runner was available with. I think, if I recall, those were only available with full-time four-wheel drive, right?
Yep. Yeah,
or they were available with full-time four-wheel drive, so you didn't have to actually engage a lever. That actually shared its platform with the Lexus GX470, which is a Prado, right? But great SUVs. Not really well liked in the Toyota community. The 4th gen's kind of the black sheep of the 4Runner line.
Yeah, and those 4.7s, people think that they're the ones that you want. I'm not sure about that. They're heavier, they're thirstier. There's a lot of downside to having that bigger engine. And that 4-liter, I think, and Charlie would know better because he's a mechanic, but I think that 4-liter is going to become an iconic engine that people are going to, want long after Toyota stops building it.
So the 5th generation came out in
N280.
Yeah, in 2009. Shared that same 4-liter. And believe it or not, it's the same truck that you can go out and buy today, but the early ones look very different. And actually, I was talking to the Toy Tech guys about this too, and a lot of people don't like the design of the first 5th gen 4Runner. So they facelifted it to the one you see today. But the first few years, they were just kind of the squared off, very boxy.
Yeah, they were kind of boxy and not very emotional. And then Mr. Toyoda, not Toyota, the CEO of Toyota came around and said, all of our cars need to have emotional appeal. And they added this kind of much more angry...
fangs on it.
Kind of angry look on the front. It got facelifted. So it did become a little bit more aggressive, and it became a little bit more... And then they also, in this latest generation, split the line between, kind of the off-road one and then the on-road one.
And the interesting thing, too, is depending on the trim, they can actually look very different. So, for example, like a limited trim on a 4Runner is going to look entirely different than a Trd Pro. The front end itself is very unique on a limited, which is kind of unusual. If you look at a Rubicon Jeep Wrangler versus a Sport Jeep Wrangler, obviously it looks very similar. But certain versions of the 4Runner have a totally different face. So the facelift came in 2014. And that's the one that we still are trucking along with today. Let's talk about some of the specs. 4-liter V6, 270 horsepower, 278 pound-feet of torque, 5-speed automatic for 2020, still a 5-speed. Right, very 90s in philosophy, but old, robust. Only one engine option, no manual transmission option, and that's the way it's been, and that's the way I think, at least in this generation, it's always going to be.
Yeah, and you also get the Toyota kind of terrain response system in it, with a little dial where you can dial up the speed of the crawl control. And in the Trd Pro, you get that basket on the roof. That's how you know it's a Trd Pro. And you get the special colors. And overall, it's just a really comfortable, thirsty, kind of the right size-ish truck. So let's talk about why it's the best off-roader. What makes it so special? Why do people love the 4Runner so much?
I think regardless of the trim you get, be it an SR5 or a Trd Pro or Trd Off-Road, the built-in magic on the 4Runner is just the old school DNA. So essentially the reason that so many automotive journalists hate it is the reason that it works so well as an off-roader, because it hasn't changed in so long. It's a box on wheels with a really strong chassis, a really stout powertrain, and nothing else. It hauls a lot, it holds a lot, and it can go anywhere. And it's not going to do it very quickly. It's not going to do it the most comfortably in class. It's not going to do it with a lot of efficiency, but it will always get the job done.
Yeah, you can put your finger on a body on frame. The Explorer, the Blazer, the Grand Cherokee, all these vehicles have gone to unibody. And there's something about an old school body on frame that just gives you more confidence when you're off-road, gives you more confidence when you're towing, gives you more confidence, I think, even when you're thinking about not having an accident, but in an accident, it's just a big, heavy, rugged vehicle. And because Toyota's now been building it since 2009, right? So that's 11 years. Their tooling costs have probably been paid for, and you can get these vehicles, I think, at a pretty reasonable cost if you're not too stressed about having the latest and greatest tech.
Well, and that's kind of the unusual thing about the 4Runner. If you look across the Toyota lineup, you typically pay a premium over some of its other competition. So be it Corolla, Camry, they're typically priced a little bit higher than something like a Maxima or what's the Nissan? I'm totally blanking. The above the Versa, Sentra. With the Corolla, they'll be more expensive than that, and even more expensive than some of the American competition because they're super well made. And it's kind of it's a thought process that you get into when buying a Toyota, is that I'm going to pay more for the quality. Well, with the 4Runner, you get the quality, but you don't necessarily pay more. So on the base end, you can get a reasonably well-equipped SR5 for mid-30s. In some cases, low 30s with four-wheel drive, low range.
Yeah, about a year ago when we were looking at buying a long-term test review vehicle for off-roading, it was between the 4Runner, of course, and the Wrangler, right? They're direct competitors in a lot of ways. And in the end, we ended up going with the Wrangler, not because we didn't want the 4Runner, but because the Wrangler had been redesigned. We went from the JK to the JL, and the Toyota had been basically the same truck since 2009. So it wasn't that we didn't want a 4Runner, it was just that we thought that you guys out there would be more interested in the JL, the new Wrangler, than in the Toyota that's been out there for 11 years. But I think, had I had my dithers and not been getting a car based on, what's the newest and greatest and what's going to get the most interest from our viewers, I would have loved to have gotten that 4Runner. Like I say, when I was on that trip from Moab to Telluride, that truck felt like, an old baseball glove. You get into the thing and it immediately just comes to hand. Everything feels comfortable. You know how everything works, and there's a sense that this thing is going to serve you like an old and happy golden retriever for the next 10, 15 years. And
really, it doesn't matter which 4Runner you get, be it a limited or a pro or an SR5 or an off-road. They're all going to be really good. Now, there is a sweet spot in the lineup. If you are looking for the best all-around off-roader, don't go for the Trd Pro.
No,
right?
It's too expensive.
It's too expensive.
And you can't lift it.
Yeah, the special suspension makes it hard to lift and hard to modify. The best one in the whole lineup is the TRD Off-Road. So it's a step below the Pro. That doesn't give you the crazy suspension of the Pro or the really cool roof rack or the crazy colors. What the TRD Off-Road gives you is everything you need to go off-road. So it still gives you crawl control. It still gives you the rear locker, all the skid plates. It's just you don't get the blingy parts. So if you're actually serious about taking your 4Runner off-road, save a few $1,000s. It's a lot of money to upgrade to the Pro and just get the TRD off-road. And that way you can upgrade the suspension later on if you want to lift. And the wheels can be changed. And, as long as you don't really, really, really need that army green, which is the hottest color, right, get the off-road. And there's even a new version now released in Chicago called the Trail Edition, which is basically an SR5 with the off-road wheels and a cooler in the back. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what that thinking was about, but there is a Trail Edition that's not the most off-road worthy.
Yeah. So our friends at Toy Tech, and Toy Tech is a company that's been modifying Toyotas for the last 20 years or so, pointed out something interesting, and that is that, like you said, the TRD Pro is really hard to lift because of the Fox shocks, the way that the suspension attaches. It's a really tough one. And then it's also hard taking Fox shocks off of, that you've paid extra for off of a brand new vehicle to upgrade to whatever other kind you want. And so you're right, exactly right. If you want to go for the ultimate 4Runner, go for the off-road and bypass the Trd Pro.
So the other thing that you are able to get on a 4Runner that is not available on a Wrangler is towing capacity.
Yeah.
You know, a Wrangler in its maximum configuration with the
3.5.
tow package, 3,500 pounds, which is really pretty useless. The 4Runner is rated at 5,000 pounds. So that's the difference between 3.5 and 5 does not seem like a huge difference on paper, but in the real world it makes a monumental shift in kind of thinking, right? Because all of a sudden at 5,000 pounds you can realistically tow a small camper and still have friends and family in the truck. You can tow a boat, right? It makes it more in line with the usefulness of a pickup truck versus just an off-road toy like a Wrangler could be in terms of the towing capacity, right? So I think that there's a lot to be said about the increased versatility of the 4Runner. Now, interior is old. If you're expecting the latest and greatest in materials or infotainment or buttons that aren't the size of Pluto, then don't get the 4Runner. But if you don't care about that and you just want something that'll last forever and take you anywhere, the interior on the 4Runner is just fine. But a lot of people hate it. You know, if you read a lot of the reviews from the magazines, they'll be like, the interior of the 4Runner is too old. But 4Runner people, I don't really think they care.
Well, it's like the Tundra, right? I mean, I think they designed the interior to be used with gloves on, right? So you said bigger than Pluto. And I think that's because everything is more like Tonka toys. So you can get and change the radio without, taking your gloves off, or you can, control the HVAC without taking your gloves off. And that's, something that's very trucky and old school, and maybe not, Tesla. It's the exact opposite of Tesla, right? Where everything is virtual and has to be done via, one screen. This is the exact opposite. And it's what you probably want off-road. I mean, I'd worry about that much tech off-road.
And for 2020, they did make some improvements. They're really small, but they're there. Infotainment system's better. A couple more USBs.
Apple CarPlay, right? Did they get that finally?
Yeah, finally got the phone connectivity.
Yeah.
A couple more USB ports. I think that's the end of the list. There might be some Trd off-road or Trd Pro goodies that it got as well. Like, I think it got the trail cam. I'm not sure about that. I have to double check that, like the Tacoma. But it did get a little bit improved on the interior. Not drastically changed. We don't know when the new one's coming, right? That's the hottest, other than Bronco. When's the new 4Runner and Tundra coming? We've heard speculation, we've heard rumors. No confirmed examples from Toyota. So, not sure what direction they're going to go with in the new one. And speaking of direction, let's talk about the engine, the 4-liter V6. It used to be the same engine that you'd find in the Tacoma. So both the Tacoma and the 4Runner had that old, naturally aspirated, big displacement V6. Well, in the current generation Tacoma, when that came out a number of years back, they actually switched to a new engine. So Tacoma went to a 3.5-liter Atkinson cycle V6. And if you talk to a lot of the Toyota community, a lot of the automotive journalists, even Toyota themselves, not so sure they nailed it on the new 3.5.
Yeah, the problem with the 3.5 is that it's not any more powerful, it's not that much more fuel efficient, and it doesn't really pair all that well with the transmission.
Yep, so the Tacoma has a 6-speed automatic versus a 5 in the 4Runner.
Yep.
And however they programmed that 6-speed, especially off the bat, was not great. It was always hunting for gears. The engine didn't make enough torque to hold a gear, so it was either 6th gear, 4th gear, 5th gear, 2nd gear. There was no constant gear that the truck would just hold. It's just very erratic. For 2020, they redid the transmission programming. I was talking to the chief engineer, and unfortunately, not that much improved. A little bit better, but it's still constantly hunting.
Yeah, sometimes, traditional, read old, is better than, cutting edge, read new. The other thing I think we should talk about, Tommy, and we'll do it right after we get to Roman's Rant, which is a new segment that we're introducing in our podcast. Do you know what we're rant about today, Tommy?
What?
We're going to talk about the Wrangler anyway. I'm going to rant about fuel gauges. You know why?
Why?
Because back when I was your age, which is in the 80s, right? We had these horrible fuel gauges in vehicles where you could never tell how much actual fuel you had. So the first half of the tank, right, according to the fuel gauge, would go like 200-300 miles, and then the last half would like disappear within 10 miles. And God help you if you actually go to the reserve. And I think back then they were designing fuel tanks as an upside-down pyramid. At least that's the way the fuel gauge read, right? Because the farther down you got, the less gas you got.
I'm not sure that's a real thing, but we'll go with it.
All right, go with it. And then recently, me and you have both had the same experience in our Silverado and in our Jeep Wrangler with the diesel, where we've had the exact same thing happen. The fuel tank goes for like in the Silverado, right? I think we would go like, we'd have like a range of like 250 miles towing, and the first 200 miles would be down to half a tank, and then the last 50 miles would be the last half. And I think I figured out why that is, and that is we've had to replace the sending units in a lot of vehicles that we've owned, right? So, you've got this gas tank that lives under the vehicle, and then there's basically something that looks like it belongs in your toilet that tells you how much gas is in the tank. It's a little floaty styrofoam thing on a little arm, right? And as the gas goes down, the little styrofoam goes down, 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 and that sends a signal to the fuel gauge. And that then reads whatever that little Sendy thing costs. And that Sendy thing costs like $10 if you buy it at like your local parts store. That's how cheap they are.
Right.
And so think about it. There's a display on the vehicle now which tells you how many miles to empty, right? That's very common.
Sure.
And how accurate could that number be when you're using a part out of a toilet to send how much fuel is actually in the tank, right? I mean, think about it. I mean, it's just a horrible system. And I just think the manufacturers continue to cheap out, this is a rant, remember, and not include a decent, realistic gauge. So every fuel economy number that comes out of that cheap-ass sending unit is going to be suspect because, like I said, it belongs in your toilet tank. It doesn't belong in a gas tank.
So I think you're really going to get a kick out of this.
Yeah.
I had an old Wrangler that was the same
Right.
thing. It would use the first half in 150 miles. The second half would be like 2, and then you'd be out of gas. I think that was like a thing with old cars. Every old car I've driven has that exact same issue. So I was looking at the fuel gauge on my 1982 Mercedes the other day. I was like, that seems weird to me because it makes a semicircle like most fuel gauges, and full is on the right, empty is on the left. And there's a marker for a half a tank, right? And if it's a semicircle, you'd think it'd be right in front of you, right? Vertically, right? But what Mercedes did is that they also have this issue, but they actually positioned the half tank meter closer to the full sign than the empty. So it's not in between, exactly in between.
Not in the middle, yeah.
It's not in the middle. It's more skewed towards the full.
So they fix it by changing the gauge.
Yeah, they moved a little line in the fuel gauge more toward full.
Yeah, so manufacturers, Tesla now gives you pretty incredibly accurate numbers on like how much range you actually have.
Well, yeah,
right?
because if you
because what they do is they actually send that data. Let's say you're driving from here to LA, right?
Right.
Other people in Teslas have driven that, so they know exactly, how much fuel economy or how much battery economy those people got, and so they can give you really detailed, great numbers on how much range you have, right? Gasoline-powered cars feel like they still have that upside-down pyramid where, the first half of the tank is 200 miles and the next half. And it's terrifying. We were towing back from Moab, right? And all of a sudden we're like, oh, we got half a tank. And next thing you know, the next gas station is 30 miles and we can barely make it to the next station. Remember that? It happened to us, right? Because you got almost watch it drop.
Yeah. Well, you'll be happy to know that's not actually an issue with the 4Runner. Because if you're driving a new 4Runner, it's perpetually out of gas. The fuel economy is that bad. So there's no need to worry about it in the 4Runner.
All right. Now, I said that's the end of Roman's rant, so we'll continue on with our 4Runner discussion. I said that we were going to do a direct comparison to the Wrangler. So let's compare it to the Wrangler because that's something that people cross-shop, right? So the Wrangler is also a 4-door Jeep. I was going to call it a crossover. You can't. Jeep people hate that, so it's a Jeep.
It's just a box.
It's a box, but it's just like
a long box.
It's just like a 4Runner. The 4Runner probably starts a little bit higher because you can get a Jeep for about $27.
Well, I think the 4Runner starts like $37.
Yeah, so the 4Runner starts a
drive.
little bit higher because you can get a pretty basic Jeep with small wheels and 2 doors and no power windows.
Yeah, let's compare 4-door to 4-door.
Well, let me just talk. So it starts a little lower, but then it ends a lot higher, right? We have a Jeep right now that we're driving around that costs $64,000. There's no way you could, know.
A Pro is going to be $52,000.
Unless you find the one to the dealer, who's still marking them up for $10,000, you're not going to get up to 64. So it starts lower, ends higher. I think the 4Runner has a couple advantages and a couple disadvantages. So a Jeep has a disconnectable front sway bar and a front locker, and you can't get those, at least not from the factory from a Toyota.
No.
And of course, the most important thing is the cheapest convertible.
Yes, but the rear window does roll down on the 4Runner.
It does, and it's pretty cool. It's that old
Basically
school.
a convertible.
Yeah. But the 4Runner has independent front suspension, which many people think is better on road.
Yes.
It's got Toyota's reputation for reliability.
That's the most important one.
For a lot of people.
Yep.
And what else does it have that you can't get in a Wrangler?
Fox shocks.
Yep, it's got Fox shocks.
Fox shocks.
Yeah.
It's got a much bigger trunk than the Wrangler.
Yeah.
And just
a roll down window.
Yeah, roll down window. Honestly,
rear window.
It makes a lot of sense to me why the 4Runner is so much more successful. Well, I shouldn't say more successful. Why Toyota fans love the 4Runner over the Wrangler. Because I'm a big Wrangler fan. Let's make that very clear. But the 4Runner, even though it's a Toyota and you get all that baked-in reliability, has a lot of value built into it that a Wrangler might not have. So a 4-door Wrangler starts a lot less than the 4Runner, right? But it also has roll-up windows.
So last year Toyota sold 132,000 4Runners.
Yeah, which is pretty remarkable for a car that's older than I am.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Pretty much. And I don't know how many Jeeps they sold, how many Wranglers.
A lot.
But it's got to be very similar because off-roaders are really red hot right now.
Yeah, but what I'm talking about is, by the time you get them spec'd out, right, with comfortable convenience features, a screen that's not the size of a potato in the Wrangler, maybe navigation, maybe heated seats, whatever you really think is important, the 4Runner is going to be better value than the Wrangler.
Yeah.
It is, and it's going to be more usable every day. Because I just think it's better sealed from the elements. It's not as boxy going down the road. It feels more like a car. The ride quality is about the same, maybe a little bit better. And off-road, the Wrangler's going to be better. It's going to go more places. But for the kind of off-roading that I think 80% of people do, which is trail running, overlanding, dirt road running, the 4Runner's going to be better in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line is if I were looking for a rig to go overlanding, I'd get the 4Runner. If I were looking for a rig to go rock crawling, I'd get the Wrangler. The Wrangler also has two other potential advantages, and that is, number one, it's a little bit more customizable. There's just the aftermarket community is huge, and Wranglers are like Harleys. You can just, you can make it your own, and the bumpers come off easier, right? Right. The 4Runner bumper is not easy to mod. And I think, at least in Colorado, Wranglers hold their value better. Not than a Tacoma, but than a 4Runner.
Yeah. I think they both hold their value well.
Yeah.
But Wrangler's probably a little better. Wrangler's also available with a manual transmission. So the 3 people out there that are actually going to buy those have a party.
And they're recalled.
Yep.
in the Gladiator, at least.
That's a reliability point. But, so there's that. And then there's also, I just totally forgot my train of thought. But it was something very interesting.
The basket on the roof?
What a bummer.
You can't put a basket on the roof of a Wrangler?
No, you can't put a basket on the roof.
You won't be able to take your top off?
I think it's, engines. You get a lot more choice of engines in the Wrangler. So there's a big V6, but there's also a tiny
all right,
turbo.
But let me ask you this. Given the choice between the 4Runner's 4-liter or the Wrangler's 2-liter turbo, 3.6-liter Pentastar, or the new diesel, which of those would you get?
Probably the 4Runner.
Yeah, me too.
V6.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
exactly
just so
right.
proven.
Yeah, it's exactly right.
Performance-wise, a 2-liter Wrangler, I think, will outrun a 4Runner from the testing we've done. It's a little quicker. The 4Runner's still pretty slow. Fuel economy, believe it or not, I think definitely the diesel Wrangler is going to be better than
probably a 2-liter too.
Yeah, than the 4Runner. But I mean, it's even as ancient as the 4Runner is, it's still such a competitive choice. And it may not be rational, like it's missing a lot of the interior quality and design that you'd expect at the price point. The Wrangler interior is better, which is crazy to think about, that a Wrangler is a better interior than a 4Runner. But it just works, I mean, it does everything people need it to do. It's durable, it's rugged. You can put your dogs in it. And you got so many choices. So while there may not be as many options as a Wrangler, right, you can't spec it from 27 to 64, there's still a lot of trims that will fit your needs. So,
all right, so last year, I was talking about that trip I took from Moab to Telluride. You did the same trip. Did you have a 4Runner Trd Pro as well in that?
Yeah, we had the 2020 Tacomas and 4Runners.
Okay, so tell me about your experience in the 4Runner. How was it?
Oh, everybody liked the 4Runner more than the Tacoma.
Really?
Yeah. It's just...
But people fought for the keys to the 4Runner.
Yeah, I would say I would say they didn't fight for the keys, but there were a few brawls.
Yeah, okay.
Definitely, because the issue is the Tacoma is just uncomfy, right?
Well, it's got that weird seating position where your legs are like straight ahead of you instead of below you. It's really weird.
And Toyota says they have fixed it. They have given it a seat that is now power adjustable.
Yeah.
But in case you've ever wondered what happens when you take a Tacoma seat and lift it up, it just means your head is going to be jammed in the ceiling.
We did some measurements a few years ago where we figured out that basically the problem with the Tacoma for me, and this is something that some people love actually, is that basically the floor height is too high versus the ceiling height, which is too low. So the cabin is really just kind of squished from a tall guy standpoint.
Now Toyota will tell you they raise the floor for more ground clearance.
Yes, I know.
Right?
Yeah. So you do get that, but in most places, I think it's like 2 inches taller in the seat than most of the competing mid-size trucks. So you're 2 inches higher when it comes to kind of the roof height.
The issue is the distance between the floor and the seat cushion. Right? There's not enough. You're basically sitting on the ground.
Yeah, and the seat cushion isn't any taller. It's that the floor is that much higher.
Right, you're right. So
and the 4Runner doesn't have that problem.
No, the 4Runner is like every other car.
Yeah.
So that was the first complaint. The second complaint was just see the engine in that Tacoma. I mean, I have no doubt it's very well made, but it's just kind of gutless. Like the 3.5 just doesn't have any torque when you need it. I don't know where they put it. Like the number's okay. It's got almost 300 pound-feet of torque, but where did it go? I mean, where are they hiding? I don't
know. Is it heavier?
I don't know. I checked under the seats. I looked in the bed. There were no spare torques to be found anywhere. Whereas the 4Runner, you hit the gas and it only has like 5 gears to choose from. So there's a 20% chance.
Maybe it has run flat torques.
Yeah, exactly. There's a 20% chance that even if there's no brain, it's going to catch the right gear. But yeah, it was just a more comfortable, better suited.
So what happened? What happened with me was, of course, when I did that same trip, and thank you Toyota for hosting us. That was really fun.
Well, for sure. Yeah.
Was I wanted to get into. I think the very first one I wanted to get into was the Tundra or maybe the Tacoma because that was new. So I drove that, and I was like, yeah, this is okay. The same issues. And then I got into the Tacoma. Or the Tundra. And the Tacoma was nimble and good off-road and very solid, but I didn't fit. The problem with the Tundra was I fit. It's great. I mean, just tons of room, old school truck, but it struggled on some places without that locking rear diff. I just feel like if you're going to have a Trd Pro, you better bring the locking rear diff because especially in a very competitive market, every other truck in that segment has a locking rear diff.
Right.
I'm not even talking a Raptor. I'm talking like even a basic Silverado with the basic off-road package. You get that G80 locker. Mm-hmm. At least you get something. And I just couldn't get past that. I was like, this is your most off-road worthy truck, and you can't do a locking diff on it. And 99% of the time, it probably doesn't matter. But when you're off-road, it does matter. And then I got into the 4Runner, and I was like, yeah, this is what I'm talking about. This is the one I'd have immediately.
The interesting thing is, so once again, Toyota, thank you for inviting me on that trip too. Best trip I've ever been on. It was amazing.
Yeah, you did the year after I did.
Yeah, I did. They had a bunch of Tacoma Trd Pros and a bunch of 4Runner Trd Pros that we could drive.
Yeah.
And then they had one Tacoma Trd Off-Road and one 4Runner Trd Off-Road we could drive. And that was the one that I was a little skeptical about because we were doing some hard trails, like we did Hell's Revenge in Moab.
Yeah,
we did a bunch of stuff above Telluride and Ouray for the FJ Summit. And the off-road trims were cheaper, and they did everything that the pros did with no additional struggling. They didn't struggle anymore. They weren't particularly any more uncomfortable. They just weren't the crazy cool color. So there were no army greens.
Yeah, that's a really hot color right now.
But there was a red one. There was a red 4Runner TRD Off-Road, and it performed brilliantly. The tires weren't as good. The tires are going to be changed anyways. But yeah, it did everything that the pros did for thousands of dollars less.
Yeah, and that's the other thing about the comparison to the Wrangler. The Toyota doesn't come from the factory with as aggressive of a tire as the Wrangler, right? The Wrangler comes with KO2s.
Yeah, I was talking to the engineers about that.
Yeah,
it's a complicated story.
Okay, what's the story? What do they say?
It's just a lot to it. So it's not that they don't want to put an aggressive tire on it.
Yeah.
But Toyota has such stringent fuel economy needs that they have to meet, and they have such stringent. I know. Surprising, right?
Yeah.
But the difference between 15 and 16 is a big deal for Toyota. They've got really stringent sound requirements they need to meet, really stringent handling requirements they need to meet. And because of that, certainly cost too, right? And because of that, the Toyotas have less of a tire than I think the Wrangler.
So I was talking to Mike Sweers, the chief engineer at least he was, on the Tacoma, right? And I said, dude, why do you have a fake hood scoop, right?
Right.
And he gave me that same answer. Basically, the tolerances for engine temperature are so specific in a Toyota that if you were to open up that hood scoop, it would change it around.
By some tiny percentage.
Yeah, but you know what? I've heard the same thing about the fact that the Taco doesn't have disc brakes in the back, right? That, I've heard that same kind of excuse. And to me, I'm just like, guys, you're Toyota. You're the world's biggest car company. You got, engineers over the top at your company. Just figure it out and make it functional. It's such a silly thing to have this kind of fake hood scoop, because what it says is, I don't have the off-road cred. And even though you do have it, by putting on that fake hood scoop, you're saying basically, I don't have it. And I don't get it. I just don't get that.
I understand the reasoning for the hood scoop thing.
Yeah.
And perhaps even the tire thing.
Yeah.
The drum brakes is kind of very silly.
Yeah.
Right. But I think it just represents what Toyota values as a brand. Right.
Longevity and reliability.
Yes, that's why they're so slow to evolve to turbocharging. That's why they're so slow to evolve to EVs. It's because if Toyota does something, every manufacturer tests like crazy.
Right.
Well, Toyota's going to test like crazy and then drive it to the moon and back, and again and again and again, and that takes time and time and time. And until each and every part can be as strong and as well made as it can be, it won't be put on the vehicle. Right, and
that's what they say.
Yeah, new technology is anytime you're adding new tech, there's always a risk of something going wrong, and that's why you never see a lot of recalls on 4Runners or Land Cruisers.
Yeah, but then you get to the kind of the Frontier problem, right? Which is you've got a vehicle that's now so old that it's no longer competitive because, you may have a very reliable vehicle, but it's not as safe, right? Because crash testing has gotten so much better. It doesn't have the latest tech in terms of either off-road or on-road stuff, and you can't really retrofit it because the chassis and body don't really accept it. And so, it's problematic. Let's talk about, in the last few minutes that we have, what we see coming down the line from Toyota in their off-road world, because we were expecting a new Tundra to be unveiled this year at the Chicago Auto Show, and it wasn't. Mm-hmm. But we have it on good authority that the next generation of Tundra will be more like the Ford, right? We're going to get a 6 versus the 8 cylinder, and we're probably going to get turbocharging. So I would expect that a lot of that will eventually work its way down to the Tacoma and the 4Runner as well.
So the interesting thing is, the rumor has it, and it's gone back and forth, but the current speculation actually is that Toyota is only going to do one full-size body-on-frame chassis. So that architecture. That architecture is going to be shared with both the Tacoma and the Tundra, right? So they're going to share a lot of kind of the bones of both vehicles. So I would expect that to extend to the 4Runner as well. I think you're right. I think we're going to see big leaps in fuel economy. So I think we're going to see smaller turbocharged engines for sure.
And probably hybrid.
Yeah, and probably more speeds in the transmission.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think they're going to go to 4. I think the chances of them going to a 4-speed is quite minuscule.
Maybe 3?
Maybe 3.
Yeah.
3 is a possibility, but at least 4 is what I'm going to guess. So that's exciting to see. And, going back to your argument, the Frontier issue. I think part of the Frontier issue is that mid-sized truck class is very hyper-competitive now. For a while in the U.S., it was, do I get a Frontier or do I get a Tacoma? There was a little while there where those were your options. But now you got GM with the Duramax twins, and you've got the Ford Ranger coming in hot, and you got all these Tacomas trying to improve. Yeah. So Frontier is just ancient, it's lost, it's confused. Whereas 4Runner, competition is Wrangler, right? And Wrangler is still using twigs for axles like they have been in 41. And they're going to hate that I said that. They're still using solid axles like they have been for 41. So there's not a lot of competition for 4Runner to really improve, and that's why it works. If for example, the Ford Bronco had been selling for the last 3 years and had offered a lot more tech and a lot more improvement for a lower price, then yes, they need to update it. But that's not the case, is it?
Yeah, but it's coming. The Bronco
is coming for the last 5 years, Dad.
It's coming, and give it a couple months, and we're going to see a Bronco, which is also going to put pressure. It's going to put pressure, and so is the Defender, which in a way also kind of sort of competes with the 4Runner. But Tommy, there's actually a bigger competitor that Toyota is actually developing themselves, and you know what I'm talking about. For a long time, the RAV4 was this little crossover-y thing that was for people who wanted an entry-level crossover, but now there's a RAV4 Adventure, and think about the cost of those. Those are right up there with the SR5s. You can get a RAV4 Adventure for $35, $36, just like an SR5 4Runner. And so in a way, Toyota is bringing that RAV4 up to the 4Runner status. It's gotten bigger. It's gotten more off-roady, right? It's gotten more rough-looking and tough-looking. And in a way, it's kind of, positioning itself in that same space that used to be the sole domain of the 4Runner.
A while back, we had a gentleman come on our show, Do They Love or Hate My Ride?
Yeah.
Who had a RAV4 TRD off-road.
Right.
Remember that? I think he paid $38,000.
Yeah, for sure.
For that RAV4.
Yeah.
And that's definitely you can for sure, especially with discounts, get a nicely equipped 4Runner for $38,000.
Oh heck yeah!
Yeah.
So maybe the strategy for Toyota is that they'll bring the RAV4 up, and then I don't know what they're going to do with the 4Runner. Maybe they'll bring that to the next level. So maybe they'll take it more into the higher, expensive domain of the more expensive Rubicon Wranglers or the cheaper Defenders or wherever the heck the Bronco is going to be.
Or maybe they'll kill it.
It's been around for so long. It's 132,000 units a year.
They're not going to kill it.
They're not going to kill it. That thing is like printing money. Who is going to kill SUV or crossover in this day and age? Nobody. I would say they will kill the Camry before they'll kill the 4Runner.
No.
Yes.
No. What about Land Cruiser?
What about Land Cruiser?
Well, they only sell 3 of those every year. You think that's
that's going to be on the Tundra platform. So, time will tell what the Tundra has. That's what the Land Cruiser will have.
I don't think so.
You don't think so?
I don't think so. I sincerely hope they bring the new Land Cruiser to the. I sincerely hope they bring the new Land Cruiser to the U.S. But I think they may only bring the Lexus. They sell more than 3. It's 3,000 or 4,000 every year, typically, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
But it's not a very high volume vehicle, and Toyota's all about volume and making it work financially.
Yeah, the Land Cruiser is a whole other animal, and we probably should do an entire show around that because it probably is one of the most iconic overland vehicles you could buy, and we've certainly, had our share of experience with them. So that's why I didn't talk about it much because I had one on the trip from Moab to Telluride, but I felt like let's leave that for its own thing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, we'll do another show on it for sure.
Well, guys, there you go. You've wasted, another 45 minutes or so listening to me and Tommy argue about what's the best off-roader you can buy. And guys, we really appreciate you joining us for this podcast. This will also be a video, and it is a video on TFLnow, so you could watch it or you could listen to it at your pleasure on the podcast serving modem. What would we call it? The podcast serving service of your choice, right?
Yeah, so Spotify, Apple. It's on your usual places.
Yeah, the usual places. And come back next week when we'll dive deeper into more talking cars.
Yep, we'll see you guys next time.
Ciao.